Today's topic is avoid evil, do good, and purify mind. And this came from the Dhammapada series, verse number 183. Before I begin, I would like to recommend to all of you, if you're interested, please download the from this link, download the PDF file containing the slides, all the slides that I'll be using. So I'll be sharing using the slides. So if you can download now, then as we go along, you can follow much better from the slides. All right, so let's begin today's sharing. First is the question, what is Buddhism? Is it a religion, a philosophy, or a psychotherapy? That was the question. And the Dalai Lama stated it is science of the mind. Basically, the focus is in the cultivation of the mind and developing the mind. And of course, when we speak of the mind, we're not just talking about our thinking, because the mind drives our behavior. So it is also the cultivation of good behavior. So when we say mind in general, it's also referring to the way we think and the way we speak and the way we act. This is why it's very important in Buddhism that we always consider think good, speak good, and do good. In fact, this statement has been promoted very widely amongst certain Buddhist circles, especially, let's say, the Fo-Guang-Shan group. They use that as their motto, think good, speak good, and do good. But in Buddhism in general, we should always be considering that all the time with our practice, to think good, to speak good, and to do good. That is the science of the mind. It is basically not centered around any god, but it is neither theistic nor atheistic. Let me clarify this, because there are a lot of people, scholars included, and even Buddhist scholars, who mistakenly claim that Buddhism is atheistic. Now, it's very important to realize that Buddhism is neither theistic nor atheistic. Theistic means it's a religion that is centered around the concept of a supreme God. Atheistic means there is no concept of God. Now, Buddhism is neither. It is not centered around the concept of a God, but it is also not completely empty of any kind of gods, because in Buddhism, we have devas, we have heavenly beings. Sometimes we refer to them as gods with a small g. We have deities. We have Brahmas. So they are referred to as gods with a small g, not the supreme God or the creator God, but God with a small g. So therefore, Buddhism is not atheistic either. So it's neither theistic nor atheistic. I'm going to touch on this a little bit in a moment. So let's move on. So it is centered around the teachings of the Buddha. And of course, in our time, in modern times today, we are looking at Gautama Buddha, right, as the main teacher of Buddhism. So basically, we are following his teachings, Gautama Buddha. And in modern times, where psychology and psychotherapy has replaced religion, because in ancient times, when people are losing hope, they're feeling fearful, they don't know how to solve their problems, they turn to God and they pray. And then sometimes they fall into maybe mental illnesses, depression, and they still pray towards God, hoping that their problems will be solved. And that is in ancient times. But in modern times, people are becoming wiser and wiser. They're beginning to realize that a lot of the times, it is not about praying. It is about how you position your mind, how you develop your mindset, how you cultivate your attitude, and the way you think and the way you act. That's going to change your life. So psychology and psychotherapy has, in a great part, replaced a lot of the functions or the roles of religion in ancient times. Okay. So what is important is this: neither theistic nor atheistic. A lot of people have been arguing about, oh, Buddhism is atheistic, and that is definitely incorrect. Let's examine what is the meaning of religion. I have listed various, I've used this in many of my sharings, especially to Catholic circles, where I explain to them that Buddhism is a form of religion, even though it does not conform to the traditional notion that there is a religion has to have a supreme God. There is no supreme God. So all these are the various aspects of what defines a religion. And the first thing we talk about is existence. Of course, in the case of some theistic religions, they talk about God creating the world. But in Buddhism, we realize that in terms of the universe, it is really an evolutionary continuum. What is an evolutionary continuum? It means it's continuously evolving. And in the Aganya Sutra, the Buddha has described that there are 4 stages of this continuum. And this complete cycle is one kalpa. So it begins from stillness, it expands to a stage where it stagnation, and then after that it condenses into a state of stillness, and then it expands again. So one complete 4 stages of this cycle, from stillness, expansion, stagnation, contraction, that is one complete cycle. And these 4 stages of one cycle continuously happening. So there is no discoverable beginning and there is no foreseeable ending. And that's what the Buddha said, that there is no discoverable beginning and there is no foreseeable ending to these 4 stages of evolutionary continuum in terms of the universe. In terms of the humans, then we are being reborn. And as we are reborn, then that whole cycle of birth, aging, sickness, death, and then rebirth again, over and over again, that is samsara. We come back into the samsaric world and experience all the trials and tribulations, all the suffering and all the joys and pleasures. So that is also a form of continuum, that we continue to be reborn and experience suffering and various forms of craving, and that leads us to be reborn over and over again. So that is also human evolutionary continuum, that we are always reborn. But what is more importantly is this concept of theology. Theology is the notion of what is God. So in other religions, they preach a supreme God, an all-powerful creator God that created the universe and created humans and so on. But in Buddhism, we don't have such a supreme God. The Buddha has pointed out there is no such creation, that it is all evolutionary continuum. And we have heavenly beings residing in heavenly realms. So they are gods with a small g, and we call them devas. And we also have deities and brahmas. So all these, if we want to use a different term to describe them, perhaps in the context of other religions like Christianity, we could say they are angels, so to speak. Angel is one word we can use. You know, they are like angels in the heaven. So we have devas in the heaven and brahmas and deities, okay? So this is, therefore, Buddhism is not atheistic because there is concept of God. The only difference is all gods have a lifespan. They are born into a certain realm in heaven. They will live for a certain number of years. In this case, compared to human age, then it is very long. You know, it is thousands or tens of thousands of years for one lifespan. So they have a lifespan in the heaven. They are born there and they will then fade off and then reborn, either again in heaven or in a different realm. So Buddhism is not atheistic from that score. And then when we talk about cosmology, Buddhism has clearly defined 31 realms of existence. So therefore, there is the concept of heavenly layers, heavenly realms. There is earthly human realms. And of course, there is also a hell realm, right? And in terms of epistemology, that is talking about belief system, doctrines, we have the Four Noble Truths as the main doctrine. And within the Four Noble Truths, the practice is the Eightfold Way. So doctrine and practice, that is what the Four Noble Truths is about. In the Fourth Noble Truth, it is describing Eightfold Way, and that is the practice. So in terms of this epistemology, belief system and practice, then Buddhism also has its own definitions and doctrines. So it's really very much like a religion. And then when we talk about soteriology, soteriology is salvation. In Buddhism, we cultivate towards enlightenment, towards becoming a Buddha. So that is salvation to us, that once we attain that state, we will become completely free from suffering. We would free ourselves from suffering. And when the body dies off, then that's the end. We no longer will come back to be reborn into samsara and experience all the suffering and trials and tribulations all over again. So that is a very important aspect of religion, soteriology. And eschatology is another important aspect. This is talking about the final destiny. Where does it all take us at the end of it? And here we're talking about Nibbana. So in the case of Buddhism, it is Nibbana. Attaining the state of Nibbana, that is the final destiny. There is nothing more beyond that. That's why it's the final destiny. And when we talk about rites, rituals, and daily practices that we do, all the rites and rituals, we pay homage to the Triple Gem. We also have chanting, and we have transference of merits. In terms of ordinance, that means the rules and regulations, and to be ordained, we have various levels of monkhood. We have samanera, which is novice, and then we have fully ordained monks, right? And lay people, they follow lay precepts, minimum the 5 precepts. In the case of fully ordained monks, they follow 227 precepts, and the ordained nuns follow 311 precepts. So there is ordinance in Buddhism. And in terms of morality, we are talking about cultivation of virtuous behavior. And we also recognize that in this process of cultivation, it leads us to the 4 Brahma Viharas. And that is metta, loving kindness, karuna, which is compassion, and then mudita, which is altruistic happiness, and upekkha, which is equanimity or stillness of mind, the ultimate stillness of mind, upekkha. So we have these cultivations. And in terms of psychology, and this is where Buddhism differs from so many other religions. Many religions do not have a regime of psychology, but in the case of Buddhism, we have cultivation of mindfulness, and then purification of mind through meditation, samatha meditation, and then vipassana meditation. So these are part of Buddhist psychology and Buddhist psychotherapy, aimed at eventually purifying the mind. And in terms of scriptural etymology, we're talking about scriptures. We have the Pali Canon written so long, more than 2,000 years ago. And then that was also translated into Sanskrit, becoming the Agamas. And these are embraced by all the different schools of Buddhism. Collectively, the Pali Canon and Agamas basically are the written scriptures of all the branches and all the schools of Buddhism. So if you look at all these aspects, they all describe Buddhism as a religion. The only difference is there is no supreme God, there is no creator God. Other than that, all else fits into a framework of whether Buddhism is a religion. So I hope this puts to rest the notion that, oh, Buddhism is not a religion. And in some cases, people say Buddhism is atheistic. Definitely not atheistic, because atheistic means completely devoid of notion of God. But we have the concept of God. So I hope this clears the air, that we can now safely point to the fact that in this case, looking at it from these aspects, Buddhism is a religion. Okay. So what kind of a religion is it? Buddhism is a humanistic religion. So what is humanistic religion? It is centered around the notion of humanism. And what is humanism? Humanism is basically a doctrine, an attitude, or a way of life centered around human interests and human values, and especially a philosophy that is rejecting supernaturalism, all these, superstitions. It rejects all kinds of superstitions, and it stresses on the individual's dignity and worth and capacity for self-realization through reason. And those are the three main points there: human interests and human values, rejecting supernaturalism. And basically, it's all about self-realization through reason. And this is also what the Buddha has been teaching us. We should examine every teaching, we should examine every practice, and reason out how it helps us, or in some cases, if it is something we are doubtful about, how it can harm us. And then if we find and we realize by reason that it is good and it is helpful to us, and wise people praise it, then we should embrace it and practice it. This was very clearly stated in the Kalama Sutra and several other sutras, that basically we're not talking about somebody being very well versed and explaining and we follow him. There is no blind faith. We're basically examining every teaching and see how it can help us, and it helping us, lead us to attain a more peaceful, harmonious, and happy life. And basically that is what Buddhism is all about: self-realization through reason. That is the notion, or the basically the fundamentals of humanistic religion. Not dependent on faith or blind faith, wishing for things to happen, but realizing that the power is within us to do what is necessary to help us. And we call this karma. Karma is your intentional action, the action you take with clear intention. And then with that intention, you execute the action, and you will then create the outcome. And that outcome you create is called the vipaka. The intention is the cetana. So those three things go together: intention, cetana; action, karma; result or consequences, vipaka. So these three things always go together. And that is really how we practice Buddhism, realizing that karma comes into effect. But also we have to be very careful that I know some people, they spend whole life thinking about karma. I think that may be a little bit overdone. Realizing that there is karma, but at the same time focus on just doing good, avoiding evil for the sake of enjoying a happy life, for the sake of happiness, not because you are afraid of karma. In other words, karma should not be like a threat to you. It should not be something where you are so fearful of karma. It is not based on a punishment reward system. But unfortunately, there are people with the wrong view, thinking that karma is a punishment reward system. No, karma is really a outcome system. You do something, you create an outcome, you create consequences, consequential. Therefore, we must behave with self-realization through reason. If we can behave like that, then we will be able to cultivate good karma, and good karma will lead to good outcomes. That's basically what the unwritten law of the universe. Good karma leads to good outcome. So realizing that, then we should realize how Buddhism is really a humanistic religion. And basically, I want to touch on this very important point, because this is really the crux of today's sharing. Soteriology, salvation. This is the path to Buddhahood, attaining this our final state of Nibbana, becoming Arahant. In the case of Theravadan, we don't differentiate a Buddha or an Arahant, because when we say a person has attained Nibbana, then he is an Arahant. Sometimes we also call him a Buddha. But we qualify, there are three different categories or three different groups of karma. Now, three different groups of Buddha. So now it's important to realize the word Buddha is not a name, not a title. It is more or less a description, a descriptive word to describe the attainment of a person. The word Buddha comes from the root Pali word Bodh. Bodh means to awaken, to wake up. Wake up from what? Wake up from the dream of existence. So a person who has attained that state is awakened, realizing that existence is nothing but a delusion, it's a dream. So the person has awoken from that, right? And by doing so, he's freed himself from all the attachments that come with, believing in existence or following existence. And there are three categories. So to be fully, basically a person who attained that is a person who is fully awake and comprehending all realities, because such a person will have a pure mind. A purified mind can see through all realities. So one who is awakened is then called an arahant, and we also call them Buddha, but there are three different types or three categories. The one that we normally refer to as the Buddha is really the samma-sambuddha, one who is supremely awakened by his own effort. So we call such a person a self-awakened Buddha, and he's the teacher of men and gods. So such a person is supremely awakened, and along with this supreme awakening, such a person would have developed a lot of special powers. But it is not up to us to figure out what kind of powers he has. He has also warned against trying to figure out the powers of the Buddha. But what is important is to realize that a samma-sambuddha is really a self-awakened Buddha who is here to teach the world for the good of the world, to teach men and gods. And then, of course, those people he teach, his disciples, become enlightened also, and they are called Savaka Buddhas. So awakened under the guidance of a samma-sambuddha. So this is the second category of Buddha, Buddhahood. And of course, there is a third one where there are people who become self-awakened, but they are not supremely awakened to the extent that they are teaching men and gods. They basically prefer complete seclusion and detach themselves from worldly experiences. So they usually go into seclusion. They do not mix with society in general, right? So it's very hard to find this Pacceka Buddha, but they do exist somewhere. And during the course of the past several years, I did hear some mention of who so and so might be a Pacceka Buddha, but of course we don't want to dwell into that. It is not necessary. What is important for us is to realize what the samma-sambuddha has taught us. The Gautama Buddha. Gautama Buddha is the last samma-sambuddha, and he came from a long line of several samma-sambuddhas. In the Theravadan tradition, we believe that there were 28 such samma-sambuddhas that we know of. Right? It's known that there were 28 such samma-sambuddhas. So the 28 are mentioned in the book called the Buddhavamsa, clearly mentioned, and it goes back a long line, and the last is Gautama Buddha, or was Gautama Buddha. So there had been 28 of them. And of course, there is a prediction. I won't dwell into it, but there is a prediction that the next one will come when the teachings of Gautama Buddha has completely vanished. And then the next one will come, and then they say, that is the Maitreya Buddha. But that's of no interest to me right now, because that will be a long time coming. Right now, the teachings of the Buddha Sasana is still widespread, and it is growing. And in fact, it has spread from the east to the west. So therefore, it's still a long time to think that the teaching of the Buddha would vanish completely. Right? So now this list of 28 Buddhas. Now in the Jataka tales, of course, there was mention of past lives of the Buddha in this Buddhavamsa, past lives of Gautama Buddha. And Going the furthest back was a time when he was a Brahmin by the name of Sumedha, and he met this Buddha at that time, going back, thousands and thousands of aeons, world cycles. And he met Buddha Dipankara Buddha. And that was how it all started for him to begin cultivation. And of course, countless lives after that, he finally, in his last life, was born as Prince Siddhartha. And as Prince Siddhartha, he became enlightened and became Gautama Buddha. So this is something we should all be aware of, and we should realize that it is not something we can easily cultivate, become Buddha within one lifetime. Maybe some people have done it, but they were not doing it one time. They must have had a long history of many lives in the past, cultivating and developing themselves until finally, in their last life, they become enlightened. So going back how Prince Siddhartha in his past life as Sumedha, the Brahmin Sumedha, met Dipankara. So this image is very popular. Everybody has seen this. This is the picture showing how Sumedha, Brahmin Sumedha, or ascetic Sumedha met the Buddha Dipankara. The story is very simple. I just keep it simple. The story is that he came from a wealthy family, a noble family, a Brahmin by birth. But he decided he wanted to do something with his life, to cultivate, to purify his mind, but he didn't know exactly how or what to do. But he was very determined. That's what he wanted to do. So he left the wealth of his family life and went into practicing asceticism, and then trying to purify his mind to attain Nibbana. Because in those days, they hear about it. And they heard about the Buddha at that time, Dipankara. So one day, he heard that Dipankara Buddha was going to visit a town, and people in that township were preparing the road for them to arrive, because in those days, in fact, during the time even of Gautama Buddha, the Buddhas do not ride animal, because when you ride on a horse or a cattle or a cow or whatever, the animal is suffering. So they walk. Therefore, during this season where it was raining, a lot of people was trying to clear the road and clean the road. And Sumedha realized that there was one patch of road nobody was doing anything about, so he volunteered to fix it, volunteered to clear that road so that it became a clean piece of road for the Dipankara Buddha and his contingent to arrive. But by himself alone, he was not able to finish the job. And then it was too late. He heard that, oh, Buddha Dipankara is arriving. It's too late. He didn't finish. So he realized that there was a patch that was still muddy. And what did he do? Because he was revering the Buddha so much and realizing that he doesn't want the Buddha to soil his feet by stepping onto the mud, he laid his body down to allow the Buddha and his contingent of disciples to cross and walk over the muddy patch on top of his body. So he sacrificed. So in fact, this was the first real act he did, which was very supreme act of self-sacrifice. So when Dipankara Buddha met Sumedha, he realized that this is a very special person. And of course, Sumedha at the time was a bit blur about how to practice. And in the course of the conversation, Dipankara Buddha predicted that Sumedha will one day become a samma-sambuddha. And of course, there was in the Jakarta tales and also in the commentaries, there were mention about that he eventually would become Gautama Buddha, being born in a certain place at a certain time. So Sumedha was curious, how can I cultivate myself to attain that? And Dipankara, of course, pointed out that by cultivating the 10 perfections. And if you can you can practice and perfect these 10 perfections, you would then become the samma-sambuddha. So these are the 10 perfections that Sumedha started to cultivate. In fact, he had already started on number 1, which was to offer his body, giving up of oneself, offering his body. And this is a great act of generosity and self-sacrifice. And of course, realizing that there are so many others to practice. I won't go into the details of discussing these 10 perfections. It's very lengthy. But basically, these are the 10 things that throughout the many lives that followed after Sumedha in his subsequent rebirth, until he reached the state of being born as Prince Siddhartha, he had been cultivating, trying to perfect these 10 perfections, perfect the practice of these 10 perfections. Now, some of you may have noticed this picture. This is an interesting one, where you can see a tiger eating, swallowing a monk with some cubs around. There is a story that in one of the later lives, Sumedha was reborn, and after many lifetimes later was born as Prince Sattva, S-A-T-T-V-A, Prince Sattva. So the story goes that as Prince Sattva, basically, in a way, it was very similar to Siddhartha. He was born as a prince to the king, King Maharata. So he was born as a prince to the King Maharata, but he gave up his princely life, left the life of a prince and became an ascetic. And along the way, he was perfecting the 10 perfections. He started accumulating students, right? So they often go into the forest to meditate. That is part of their practice. And one day, together with a group of students, they went into the forest to meditate. And when they came to a cliff, he looked down and he saw there was a tigress, starving, weak, and so weak that the poor tigress was not able to hunt any prey, and so hungry that the tigress actually started eating her cubs. The story went that there were 7 cubs. Some stories said 5 cubs. Some stories said 3 cubs. So it depends on where you hear the story. But whatever it is, it's a number of cubs. And the poor tigress was so weak, started to eat the cubs. And when Prince Sattva, or ascetic Sattva, saw that, he realized he must do something. And the story was that he knew that there was no time for him to go out and trying to get some food for the tigress. There was no time. And of course, the solution was to go and kill an animal, but they would not be killing. So they don't want to kill an animal for the tigress. What he did was, in order for him to do what he was planning to do, he told his disciples, "Oh, why don't you guys go away and look for food? And when you find food, you come back." So that he sent his disciples away, and alone from the top of the cliff, he realized that he had to do something. So basically, he reflected that his body, that the tigress needed meat, blood, and so on. His body could be offered as food. So he jumped off the cliff. He leapt off the cliff and fell down and died next to the tigress, offering his dead body for the tigress to consume, so that he saved the tigress from further killing her cubs, and also from committing such bad karma of killing her own cubs. So this was an act of supreme sacrifice of Prince Sattva, or ascetic Sattva. And this is perfection of dana. There is nothing higher than this in terms of dana. Offering your body and giving up your life in order to save a few lives, and in order to prevent a tigress from committing further bad karmas. So this is the supreme sacrifice. There's nothing more higher than this, really. Right? So this was perfection of dana and other things along with it. So this is really one of the stories that spoke about how during many lifetimes, since the time of Sumedha until Prince Siddhartha, that this rebirth, life after life, had been perfecting the practice of the 10 perfections. So all this mentioned, right? So the 28 Buddhas were mentioned. Now, all the Buddhas basically taught the same thing, and this is why during a time when the Buddha was resting, and his assistant or his attendant, Venerable Ananda, while residing in this Jetavana monastery, he witnessed that the Buddha was giving fundamental instructions to the disciples, to the bhikkhus or the monks, right? Telling them how to practice and how to train themselves. He was kind of curious. He realized that there had been past samma-sambuddhas. So he asked Gautama Buddha, Venerable Ananda asked Gautama Buddha at the time, these fundamental instructions that you were giving to the bhikkhus, is this the same as the previous Buddhas, the previous samma-sambuddhas? Right? Is it the same teaching of all the Buddhas? And this led the Buddha, Gautama Buddha, to then utter these 3 verses in order to explain that all the Buddhas taught fundamentally the same thing. It's no different. Right? So I'm going to show you these 3 verses using the translation of Buddha Rakkhita. There are a few very good translators. Narada is an old-fashioned style of translation. My next favorite is Buddha Rakkhita. And there is another one that I also use, I will show you later, Venerable Sarada. Of course, Narada and Buddha Rakkhita had since passed. The good news is Venerable Sarada is still alive, living in Singapore. So those of you who are interested and want to get in touch with him, just drop me a note. Okay, so I'm using the translation of Buddha Rakkhita. Verse 183. Right? To keep it simple, it says, to avoid all evil, to cultivate good, and to cleanse one's mind. This is the teaching of the Buddhas. Notice the word Buddha is in plural, meaning all the Buddhas were teaching this exact same thing. That is, to keep it simple, the simple translation is avoid evil, do good, and purify mind. That's it. That is the title of today's sharing, basically. Avoid evil. Now, I want to elaborate on this because this statement, avoid evil, cultivate good, is too simple. There's something deeper than that. And that's what I want to share. Right? Purify mind is very straightforward. That's basically cleansing the mind of all unwholesome thinking, right? Purifying the mind. That is fairly straightforward. But there's something deeper than just avoid evil and doing good. Then the next verse, of course, is enduring patience and so on. I won't read all of it. If you download the PowerPoint file, the PDF file, you will have all this. So I won't go into details of the next 2 verses. I will only focus on verse 183, basically. So these are the 3 verses which the Buddha uttered to describe the teaching of all the Buddhas being the same throughout. Right? So fortunately, I got my hands on Dhammapada chanting by Venerable Indaratana.
Samba papansa akaranang kusalansa upasampada sachinta pariyodapanang etang buddhana sasanang kanti paramang tapotitikha nimbanang paramang vadanti buddha nahi pambajito parupaghati samano hoti parang vihetayanto anupavado anupagato patimukhecha sangvaro mantanyutacha bhantasmin පන්තං ච සයනාසනං අදිචිත්තේච ආයෝගෝ ඒතං බුද්ධාන සාසනං.
Okay, this verse 183, the Pali translation, I'm using a translation by Venerable Sarada. Okay, so the first statement there in verse 183, commonly this is translated as avoid evil, but actually the exact translation is something deeper than that. Right? So the first part, sabba-pāpasa, basically talking about all the evil ways. So it's not about evil as a noun, but evil as a verb, the way we act, the way we think, the way we speak, and the way we act, which could be evil. And akaranang basically means to abandon, to give it up, not to cling on to it, right? So it's really not avoiding evil. The reason for this is because evil thoughts and evil deeds are all because of defilements within us. So these defilements are inside us. They arise. And when they arise, we can't avoid them, so to speak. We can only realize, so self-realization through reason. We can only realize that it is happening, that we are beginning to behave or think or speak in a manner which is not wholesome. And then we learn to let it go, abandon it, let go. So the key thing here is learning how to let go these evil ways, evil practices, because the thoughts will arise. See, you can't avoid. Sometimes unwholesome thoughts do arise. Simple unwholesome thoughts could be thoughts of craving, greed, lust, or anger, but it can then turn into hatred, and then it becomes very bad, right? From something which is mildly unwholesome or unpleasant, turning into something very evil. When aversion, see, aversion turning into hatred, that is very evil. Aversion means something unpleasant we want to avoid, aversion. But if you can't avoid it and it keeps happening to you, what happens? You start to get angry with it. So aversion first turns into anger. Now you begin to be angry with the circumstances that cause this unpleasantness. Now if it continues to hurt you, then this hurt gets out of control. Then you become very hateful. You start to have hatred towards it. Now, you think that it might be hating something, but it could be also hating a person. You have to be careful. It could be a relationship that became toxic. And then at first, trying to avoid that person doesn't work because you keep bumping into that person for whatever reason. And then you begin to get angry with that person each time you encounter that person. And that didn't get rid of the problem because you're still interacting with that person somehow by circumstances. And then it reached a point where you start to hate each other. See, it becomes evil. So therefore, it is not something you can avoid, so to speak, but it is something you can realize through reason that I'm now beginning to get angry with this person, and then I'm now beginning to hate this person. Learn to let it go, abandon it. So this is really the essence of this first part, which is often translated as avoid evil, but the real meaning is abandon evil ways. Let it go, right? And I'll just, And then the key phrase there is to abandon the three poisons: lust and greed, anger, rather aversion and hatred, and finally the delusion of self-centered existence. So it's lust turns into greed. As I mentioned earlier on, the aversion turns into hatred. Now lust can also turn into greed. If it is something pleasant, you like it, you enjoy it, you want it. So if you want something, that is lust. Wanting, desiring something, lusting for something, craving for something. But as soon as you get it, you feel that you don't have enough, you want more. I mean, a lot of people are like that. They enjoy something, but it is not enough. Now they want more. So lust, desires, craving can turn into greed. And greed is now bordering on evil ways. Because when you reach a stage where you are greedy, you begin to do unwholesome things in order to get what you want. So simple lusting or desiring eventually turns into greed, which can turn into a very evil, unwholesome activity. Right? Your behavior can become very evil in order to satisfy the greed. And that's why it's very important to learn how to abandon them. Right? And the second part, which often translated as do good. Now, if you think about do good, that is just a simple verb, do good. Oh, that means I do good, but it sort of suggests doing good from time to time. Now, that is really not what the Buddha meant. He was not referring to doing good here and there, a little bit here, a little bit there, right? So he was talking about entering into a life of goodness. So basically, good is this kusala. Kusala simply means something that is skillful, helpful, or something that is wholesome and full of goodness. So wholesome actions and skillful means. Then the next statement, the next word there is upasampada. This is basically generation and maintenance. And this is referring to something coming from within. So it's really self-actualization. So therefore, this is not just doing good. This is really cultivating a life of goodness. So the essence here is that to live a good life. And of course, the next step from lay life is then to renunciation. Right? So to live a good life, that's really what it is. It's not just doing good, but to transform your life into a life of goodness. Live a life that is filled with goodness and wholesomeness, right? Free from evilness and unwholesomeness. And the last part is pretty straightforward, purifying one's mind. Before I go there, I just want to point out an important thing here. The second part, upasampada. Upa refers to inside you, internally. See, in other words, it's doing good is not an external thing. External thing is just the manifestation of the action, but it begins from inside, right? From within. That's why the translation there is self-actualize. Right? So it's, in other words, it's not just an action. It is cultivating a lifestyle of goodness, right? So that's what the upasampada means. And then, of course, the last part is fairly straightforward, purifying and disciplining your mind, one's mind, right? And this is basically self-realization and disciplinary practice, disciplined practice. I'm not commenting or criticizing anyone, but I do see quite common, and in fact, once in a blue moon, I'm also guilty of it. We like to purify other people's mind. We like to point out other people, oh, you like this, you like that, you know, and instead of looking at our own practice. So it is important for us to look at our own mind and not just pointing at others. And of course, unfortunately, many people do that. They like to pick on other people's faults. They like to correct other people and purify other people's mind without looking within. So this looking within is very important, right? So basically, this is the teaching of all the Buddhas, and this is from Venerable Weragoda Sarada. He's still living in Singapore. I think he's about 79 years old, maybe around there. He's teaching meditation there. He's not very active speaking. I think he may have some issues with health, but I'm not sure of the details. But you can still get in touch with him if you're interested. And he's written some excellent books on Dhammapada and a few others. So that is his translation. And I really, really appreciated learning from his translations. I have not met him. I heard that he used to teach in Mahindarama in Penang a long time ago in the 60s and 70s. So, but since then, he has started his own meditation center in Singapore for the past 3 decades. So I learned a lot just by reading his translation, because you see, all these translations are so precise. In fact, it reminds me very much of my teacher's translation. His translations are very, very close to Bhante Punnaji's translation. This is why I'm really studying his translations very deeply, because it's really so helpful. I learned so much from just simply reading his translations of Dhammapada, and I do encourage people to get hold of that. You can just Google that and find it. If you can't find it, just send me an email or contact me, and I'll send you the links. You can download his translations. Right. So basically, the last part is about purifying the mind, and this is really the teaching of all the Buddhas, the dispensation of the Buddha Sasana, the domain of all the Buddha's teachings. Now, I'm now showing you the actual translation from my teacher, Bhante Punnaji. It's almost identical to what Venerable Sarada has explained word for word. And Bhante Punnaji pointed out, it's abandon evil, all evil ways, enter the good life. That means transform your life and live that good life. And the ultimate entering a good life is really renunciation. And that's really what is meant there. It's not just doing good, an act at a time, one good act at a time. But of course, that's a good starting point. One act of kindness at a time is a good starting point. But this second part is really talking about entering the good life and purifying mind. So when we practice this, now in fact, this verse, I love to use this because some people from other religions are not familiar with the teachings of the Buddha, and they ask me, can you give me a summary of what the Buddha taught? I always use verse 183. So it's very simple, straightforward. Of course, if you're not able to explain this translation the way I did, you can just use the traditional one. Avoid evil, do good, purify mind. This is the teaching of all the Buddhas. That's really what the Buddha's teaching is all about. Of course, the ultimate attainment, if we do that perfectly, cultivating the 10 perfections, practicing it to perfectly, we would attain Nibbana. We would then become an Arahant. But that is not really, specified here. But what is important is for us to realize that, this is really the teaching of all the Buddhas. And I've explained to you, it is really abandoning evil ways and not just avoiding evil by itself per se. So what does abandon evil way really suggest? If we were to practice that, what happens? That means we are not causing any harm to ourselves. We are not causing any harm to others, other beings. In other words, we are not causing any dukkha, any form of suffering to ourselves or to others, if we are able to practice this abandon evil ways. And if we were to practice enter the good life and cultivating it, what happens? We will be cultivating a life of wellness, peace, harmony, and happiness of all beings, not just of ourselves, but all beings. You see, people don't become monks or they don't renounce just for their own sake, just for selfish means. No. All the monks that I know of, they renounce because they want to serve the world. Right? They want to serve humanity. So they're practicing all this wellness, peace, harmony, and happiness for the sake of all beings. And this is also the reason why the Buddha came, for the benefit of mankind. Right? So therefore, enter the good life really means this cultivation of wellness, peace, harmony, and happiness of all beings. And of course, purifying mind. And then you got to take it one step further and learn and practice meditation. Right? Purifying mind begins with right view. You have to orientate your mind to think in the right way. And once you start to think in the right way, you then become motivated to want to practice the right thing, and then you have this right intention. And if you notice, these are the first two of the Eightfold Way: right view, right intention, or some translations are right understanding, right thought. Now you are motivated, you want to do that, and then you begin to live a good life, right? And purifying your mind, purifying your behavior. And as I mentioned earlier, purifying mind leads to purifying your behavior. They are inseparable in that sense. If you have a pure mind, your behavior will be pure. If you don't have a pure mind, your behavior will show, right? So basically, then you are able to purify the mind. Now, if you take it one step further and you go into meditation and you begin to purify the mind and still the mind. So this process of purifying and stilling the mind is abandoning the 5 hindrances. And if you're able to do that, now, the 5 hindrances, you don't easily get rid of it right away, because only the Arahant would have reached a state where he has completely eradicated all the 5 hindrances. But for the rest of us, we can temporarily suspend. Temporarily, I wouldn't like to use the word suppress. Suspend, basically still it, keep it still. Suppress is like conflict, pressing it down. No, you're not pressing it down. There's no force involved. It's basically letting go and stilling the mind. And this process is really samatha meditation. So this is the first stage in purifying the mind. If you're able to still the mind, you're able to suspend the 5 hindrances, at least during the course of the meditation. Of course, once you get out of the meditation, you go back to normal lay life or normal life, you begin to behave in some funny ways, your 5 hindrances are popping up now and again. But the more you practice this, the more you're able to suspend your 5 hindrances, eventually it'll get to a point where they don't show up so much in your daily life. And this is really what this is trying to teach us, that we must go into this practice of meditation. And when you get into samatha meditation and you reach a state where you're starting to experience jhana, your mind begins to turn so still, it reaches a state of upekkha, equanimity. And then you begin to see the realities of life, and then you begin to see, and that is vipassana. V is discerning, passana is seeing with the mind. So then you're able to see very clearly the realities of life. And how does it help you? It helps you to awaken, right, from this, your boundless potentials, awakening of this human's boundless potential, ultimately to awaken to become a Buddha. The ultimate state of awakening is this awakening to become Buddha, right? There are 4 stages to reach that. Right? You begin to become a stream winner, stream entrant, and so you move on through the 4 stages until you finally become an Arahant. So that is really awakening of this boundless potential. So I hope that is clear now. This verse 183, the deeper meaning of verse 183. That's what I was trying to. I hope to share today, to show you the deeper meaning of verse 183. It all started with a simple question from Venerable Ananda asking the Buddha, Gautama Buddha, all the other Buddhas teaching the same thing, giving the same kind of instructions. Now, if you really want to study this, I would like to direct you to a very helpful sutra, and that is in the Digha Nikaya, Sutra number 14, Mahapadana Sutra. Basically, different translators call it a different title. The version I have is by Maurice Walsh. He calls it the Great Discourse on Lineage. The other translators have a different meaning for the title, but it doesn't matter. It is Digha Nikaya, Sutra number 14, Mahapadana Sutra. And I will give you the link at the end of this sharing, and then you will be able to download the PDF file of this Maurice Walsh translation. Now, in this sutra, the Buddha actually described the last 7 Buddhas, including himself, starting from Vipassi and going on until himself. So the 7 Buddhas. So Gautama Buddha actually saw a group of monks, a group of disciples talking about past lives, talking about past Buddhas. So they were all curious, and some were arguing and all that. And so the Buddha entered into the group and asked them, what were you talking about? And they said they were talking about these past lives. So then the Buddha started to ask them, are you interested to listen to what I have to say about past Buddhas? And they were very interested. So in this sutra, Buddha came out twice on 2 occasions, talk about 2 different sets of things about the last 7 Buddhas. Very interesting, talking about where they came from and who are their parents and their background. Basically, these 7 Buddhas, some of them were like Gautama Buddha when he was Prince Siddhartha. Some of them were born as prince, right? And some of them were born as Brahmins. So read this sutra and you will get it. But do realize it's a very long sutra, because Digha Nikaya sutras are all very long. It is a long discourse. But read it slowly and you will enjoy it. I really enjoyed reading it and I learned a lot from it. In fact, I'm going back to read it again and again, because each time I read through it again, I learn something new. This is the important thing about reading sutras. Don't just read it one time, get an idea and think, oh, that's it, I know it. No way. You read a sutra, you understand it, and you think about it, and then find like-minded people, Kalyana Mitras, people who are also doing the same thing. Or better still, find a teacher monk. Ask them, clarify certain things. Once you get a slightly better idea, now go back and read the sutra again. And then now think of it from a new perspective. And then you begin to learn something new. So this is what I would like to advise all of you to do that, right? So we talked about this definition of humanistic religion based on the notion of humanism, and the most important thing is self-realization through reason. We realize for ourselves and what really are the cause and effect, and therefore we are able to understand what is good for us, what is not good for us. And if we don't do that, we will end up behaving like animals. And there is a very ancient shloka. Shloka is a poetic verse poetic verses used to teach children how to behave and how to be good people. So this is an ancient one that said that taking food, sleeping, avoiding dangers, sexual activities, these acts are common between all animals, including human. Normal human beings, of course, other than monks, engage also in sexual activity. So all human beings do these things, right? But the difference between a human and animal is the ability to think. That is what is different between human and animals. So we must be able to think. And this thinking process, because a human being is endowed with this cerebral cortex that allows us to think and cognize, the thinking, rational thinking, and reason out. Cognition and conception. Reason out and clarify our thoughts. So humans have this ability which most animals do not seem to display it, right? And therefore, if we are able to make use of it, then we don't behave like animals. So I would like to now share with you one of the short excerpt from Bhante Punnaji's lecture.
So the purpose of the Buddha was to teach people how to overcome this animal part and develop that human part properly. It is only then that you become fully human. To get rid of that animal part and cultivate the human part. That is the meaning of becoming a Buddha. That is the meaning of becoming an Arahant. Now, you may have heard that to become an Arahant is to get rid of 3 things. Lobha, dosa and moha. Lobha is what I call lust. Lobha is lust. Dosa is hate, hatred. The lust, hate, and moha is the delusion of self. All selfishness comes from this delusion of self. Self is a delusion. So it is to get rid of lust, hate and delusion. That is what the Buddha taught. That is to transcend the animal nature and become fully human. But the problem is that fully human state is not a normal state. The fully human state is not a normal state. It is a supernormal state. That is, you are rising above the normal and you are getting into a supernormal state. This is how the Buddha becomes a supernormal person. And the Arahant, a perfected disciple of the Buddha, is also in a supernormal state. Now in modern, what is called psychotherapy, what they are trying to do is to bring an abnormal person into a normal state. But what the Buddha was trying to do was to bring a normal person into a supernormal state. So this is very important to understand, that Buddha was also a psychotherapist, but his psychotherapy was to bring the normal person to a supernormal state. His psychotherapy is not to bring the abnormal person to the normal state, but to bring the normal person to a supernormal state.
Normal conventional psychotherapy is to help people who have mental illnesses, who are suffering from all kinds of mental illnesses, to help them recover from that. So in other words, people who are experiencing mental illness, to try to help them recover from that to become normal. And that is modern psychotherapy, Western psychotherapy. But what the Buddha taught is, in the case of Buddhist psychotherapy, it is to bring a normal human being from this normal state of mind to purify the mind to a state where it is supernormal. It is beyond normal, because when the mind is so pure, it is not normal. People who have purified their mind, they have then reached that highest state of purification of mind, right? The Arahant. These are not average normal people. And Bhante Punnaji likes to call them supernormal. And in fact, he even sometimes use a term called Superman. Right? So Arahants are basically Superman. So what the Buddha really tried to do was to teach normal people, I hope I'm referring to every one of us here, normal people, how we can purify our mind to reach that supernormal state, right? To become to become enlightened and become an Arahant, to awaken from the dream of existence, and that is samsara. And I would like to finish off with this very simple verse. It says, just as the lotus born in the water, grown up in the water, rises above the water and remains unsoiled by the water, so is the Buddha. Though born in the world, grown up in the world, he rises above the world and remains unsoiled by the world. And therefore, the supernormal human is one who is no longer disturbed or affected by worldly things. because he has reached a state of purification of the mind.
There is a story of a Brahmin who one day found the Buddha under a tree, calmly meditating. The Buddha's mind was still. He radiated such power and strength that the Brahmin was reminded of a tusker elephant. The Brahmin asked him who he was. "Imagine a lotus that had begun life underwater," the Buddha replied. But grew and rose above the surface until it stood free. So I too have transcended the world and attained the supreme enlightenment. "Who are you then?" the Brahmin wondered. "Remember me," the Buddha said, "as the one who woke up."
So the one who woke up, basically talking about awakening. The Buddha is one who is awakened. And with that, I end my presentation. I would like to share with you some links. So this is, once again, for those who missed it, this is the link to all the slides in today's sharing. Please feel free to download it. And there are some very interesting, important information there, especially the detailed translation by Venerable Sarada. Okay, I also promise you the link to the sutra. So this is Digha Nikaya number 14, the sutra. And you can also download that. This is the version by Maurice Walsh. So feel free to download and read that. It's you'd have to read it a few times in order to really benefit from it. So with that, I end my sharing. We will have some questions in a moment. So, okay. Brother Eddie.
Brother Billy, for the wonderful sharings. So
we already have a few questions.
Yeah, a few questions. Yeah, let's see what questions if you have questions, please post it on the comment on Facebook. So yeah, this is the first question by.
We'll start off with
Jeanette.
this first
Yeah,
question by Jeanette Ang from Philippines. Okay, basically during the first Buddhist council, there were all 500 of them, including Ananda, who had just become enlightened the night before. And this is a story that he became enlightened the night before. All of them were enlightened under the guidance of the Buddha. Of course, the 499 were already enlightened at the time when the Buddha passed into Parinibbana. But Ananda became enlightened the night before the first Buddhist council. That happened roughly 3 full moons after the passing of the Buddha. So the answer is yes. All 500 of them were enlightened under the guidance of the Gautama Buddha. We have another question here. The difference of Buddha and the Arahant, how they attain Buddhahood. Did I understand right? So it depends which one do we want to attain our Buddhahood. No, it is not like this. When I mentioned there are 3 categories of Buddha, what I mean is samma-sambuddha is something which is for every one of us is almost impossible, right? It's only once in many, many aeons of time, many life cycles that such a Buddha comes. And that person is very, very absolutely rare. It's a gift to the world. So to become a samma-sambuddha is something which is very, very rare. The other category are the Savaka Buddha, who are basically enlightened under the teachings of the Buddha. And all of us sharing this, any one of us becoming enlightened, or good luck to you, and I bow to you, any one of us becoming enlightened because we have studied the Dhamma, then we would also be called Savaka Buddha because we studied the Eightfold Way, we practiced it until we became enlightened under the teachings of Gautama Buddha. So basically, it is not something we can choose. There are people who were not exposed to the teachings of the Buddha. So they by themselves may become enlightened. And those are Pacceka Buddhas. And usually they hide in the forest, they don't mix with the people. And in fact, they are not mixing with Buddhist people, people we know each other as studying the Buddha Dharma. Usually they study on their own. They may or may not even have heard of Gautama Buddha. It doesn't matter. But those are also very rare, especially in these modern days when there's so much distraction. So we don't choose, because we are now learning it from Gautama Buddha. The Dharma that we learn is from Gautama Buddha. And therefore, if any one of us in a future life become enlightened, it is because we have learned under the guidance of Gautama Buddha. We also have another question from Brother Willie. Is it still considered cultivate good when one do good deeds, but with a hope of good returns to himself or herself? Okay, this you have to be very careful about when you do good deeds. It is very important to remember what I mentioned. Those three things go together. Intention, which is cetana. Action, which is karma. And the consequences, which is vipaka. All three go together. That means when we speak of karma, we are talking about karma with intention. That means the karma it began with a cetana. So when you do good because you want to get merits, what was the intention of doing good? The intention is to earn merits. Now, if you want to earn merits, what are you thinking of? You are really then desiring merits. And that was the reason you do good. That was the reason you help people. Now, if you help people because you want to earn merits, then you're not having pure intentions. You're having some degree of selfishness. But of course, the action that you do, the good that you do is helpful. So perhaps you will gain something from that, but you will not gain as much as one who does it for the sake of helping people. So in other words, when you see people suffering, without thinking about rewards and returns to you, without thinking about merits and good karma, without fearing bad karma of not helping people, you just think that, oh, this person needs help. I can do something, so I'm going to help that person. So this is pure intention. And then you will get really very good result from that. So I hope that answers your question, that if you try to do good for benefit, for return of merits, then your intentions are not pure anymore. The goodness you do, you may, by helping people, you may get something from it, but it is not as much as a person who does it from pure good intentions. So anytime and these thoughts will arise. Oh, I'm going to get good merits. I wish I will have a better rebirth by doing good. So let go those wishes. And this is what we mean by abandoning. Let it go. Otherwise, you're filling your mind with the wrong intentions when you try to do good. Okay, so I hope that answers the question. So I think that's all we have for now. Those three questions. All right, so
yeah, I think that's all.
Yeah,
I don't see any more questions. So the night's getting late, so that's all. I think, Brother
yeah,
Billy.
we'll do some
Thank you so
sharing
much.
of merits.
Sharing
Okay,
of merits, yeah.
so sorry. We spent this last hour together, and we have spent this time productively, beneficially, to learn something and share the Dharma. We must also realize that there are a lot of people suffering out there, especially people who are under lockdown, and many of us are also experiencing that. So let us now dedicate and share the merits that we have acquired from this wholesome activity of sharing the Dharma. Let us now dedicate it to the people who are suffering from this coronavirus pandemic. Let us put our palms together and recite it together. All right, let's go. We dedicate the merits we have acquired from sharing of the Buddha Dharma to all beings affected by the coronavirus pandemic around the world. May suffering beings be suffering free. May the fear-struck fearless be. May grieving beings shed all grief. May all beings find peace and relief. By the grace of the merits we have acquired, may we never follow the foolish. May we follow only the wise until we attain the highest and most supreme bliss of Nibbana. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. All right. Thank you very much. Please stay safe. Stay home if you can help it. And if you do go out, please take care and remember to wear masks. I wish all of you good health, safety, and may you be well, comfortable, peaceful, and happy. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.